Deb Shine Valentine, and I am the primary author and editor of the book Feel Better, Do Better, a guide for people who want to change the world, but sometimes have trouble making it to lunch. And this is one of what I hope will be 8 interviews with one of the 8 co-authors of this book, the amazing Joyce Washington. And I'm so happy that you're here with me today and that you carved out time right before Juneteenth weekend celebrations that I know are taking up so much of your time on top of your big work and everything else that you're doing. So thank you for making time to come today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to start with a pretty simple question. Just, I contacted you. I said, I have this idea for this book. Here's the title, or at least the basic idea. We're going to talk about living this path of thriving for equity. Want to have lots of voices, not just mine. Do you want to be part of it? And you said yes. So why did you want to be part of this project?
I've been involved in racial justice work all my life, essentially. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been involved in a way of helping others. As a Black woman, that's my whole life, right? I'm involved in this work. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I've started to write and do facilitation of workshops and to really encourage and work with others who may be just beginning their work. And I had just completed a article and a workshop on affinity groups. And so I thought this would be an opportunity to really share my thoughts about why affinity groups are so important for people of color, people of the global majority. Because just moving through this white bubble that we all have is exhausting, just day to day, just living regular, just nothing special. And so to be able to be in a space that is intended and designed and built for folks who share that that heritage, that culture, allows us to really relax in a way that you can't relax in a predominantly white environment.
Yeah.
So that was a long answer. Sorry.
Oh, no, that was a perfect answer and a perfect segue into my next question, which was going to be about your particular essay. So, as you said, your essay is about affinity groups and why you believe they're important, and you've shared some of that already. Is there one particular thing that you'd like to highlight, or a particular story that you'd like to share that's connected to that topic of the importance of affinity groups for people of the global majority? And I'm going to add on, could you also share why that is the term that you prefer? And yeah, because some people may not be familiar with that term.
Okay. I suppose the thing that I would highlight is how important I believe affinity groups to be, because in today's world, there aren't a lot of opportunities to be in a group, an affinity group, where you can really talk about the weight of white supremacy culture and its impact to you, where people get it, right? So in affinity groups that I lead and participate in, I want people to be able to come in and to go, to have a sense of relaxing and know that they will be heard, seen, nurtured, and supported.
Mm.
And you can't get that in mixed groups. It doesn't exist. And what was the second
Oh, the
question?
second was the term,
Oh,
people
this
of the global
global
majority.
majority. The original term is Black, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And I think to be more inclusive, because white supremacy, patriarchy, economic oppression impacts other people, other groups of people, of other groups of humans that may not fit that particular description. And so by using Black, Indigenous, people of the global majority, it builds a much bigger tent and allows an opportunity for more people to feel like they can come in. There's the whole gender intersectionality, all of that. And we all are struggling with some form of oppression, really, in this country. Unless you are, now I know this may be hard for some people to hear, but unless you are white, male, heterosexual, there's some oppression going on for you. Now, you may not want to admit that. You may not be able to see that, but trust me, it's there. And so people of the global majority sort of expands that tent, and allows for more inclusivity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I have two follow-up questions on that.
Okay.
So one is, well then, so I'm a white woman, so then I can come to that group, right? BIPOC, I can come. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not, because, and
Because
in
I know
fact,
we've experienced this
yeah,
together.
we've
So
experienced
maybe
that
tell a little
together.
story about that.
It was my very first BIPOC, people of the global majority session with your thriving, your group, your consulting group. And all of these white women show up. But, on Zoom, you can't really tell. And I wasn't sure how these individuals define themselves. But there was someone in attendance who knew a couple of these women, and she knew that they did not define themselves as people of color of any kind. And so I ended up having to say to the group that unless you define yourself as a person of color, as a person of a non-European cultural heritage and background, This is not a place, an environment for you. And that was growth for me because I really didn't expect any white people to show up. But to your point, I guess a lot of people aren't clear on either what affinity groups are or what the term BIPOC really means. Oftentimes there are people who don't see themselves as fitting that description, mixed race people. And by taking color out, again, you expand what people might feel drawn to. We all have so much work to do individually. Not just white folks, Black folks, we got our own work. People of color, people of the global majority. And some of that is getting comfortable with just where you fit in this puzzle of humanity. Right?
Yeah.
And getting comfortable with that. In fact, in a couple of my sessions, there are a couple of people who are of mixed heritage, and they've shared at various points that they've struggled to find where they might fit. But I do think global majority just allows for a bigger tent.
Yeah.
And to help people navigate through at their own pace, in their own way, this water that we're all swimming in, but to know that they're being supported.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
Yeah, one of the things I like about the term Black, Indigenous people of the global majority is that it's not in comparison to white. Like BIPOC, there's still this way that people of color is like not white people, like whereas people of the global majority is acknowledging that people of darker skin tone, people who are not in the dominant cultural positions of power in a lot of places, they are the global majority. This is most of humanity. And it sort of decenters whiteness, even in the term. And I feel like also in your conversation, you nodded towards how when we do this work around race, so in our work together, our primary focus is on racial equity, racial healing, but it necessarily opens you up to seeing all the other spaces where there is oppression. So in Feel Better, Do Better Together, the group coaching program, which is not exactly the same as the book, but definitely birthed out of the book on some level. We talk about it being a Black and woman-centered space that is open to anyone who's ready to be in that space with compassion and courage. But we're centering the lives of Black people and women because that's what we're able to do, being who we are.
Right.
And it necessarily then makes us more and more sensitive to and aware of other places where oppression is present. And so I know for me, the first time that I was introduced to the idea of the question, what are my pronouns? And what are your pronouns? And the possibility of different pronouns was at a racial justice focused conference. And similarly, like many years ago, white women who started fighting for the vote for themselves were often the ones who then became, or vice versa. They started fighting for freedom for African Americans from slavery and then noticed, oh, wait, we don't have rights. So there's this, we all have intersectional identities. So even a person who is white, heterosexual, and male, there's probably some aspect of their identity that is oppressed in the system. They have a lot of privileges, but there's probably some aspect where they experience oppression. So all of us have that intersectionality. But this term, people of the global majority, in the way that you're using it, you're really talking about if you identify in some way as Black, Indigenous, person of color, you're mixed race, like your experience has been impacted by this fake puzzle of race and where you fit in it, acknowledging that it's biologically fake, but that it has a real impact on our daily lives. If you've had that experience, if that is part of your identity and your lived experience in this particular lifetime, you are welcome here, and we want to share these experiences together. And sometimes there are further divisions. Like it can be helpful to have a group in one of the organizations that I did some consulting with. They had a Black affinity group and a non-Black people of color affinity group, because the closer you are to Blackness, the more a lot of this stuff affects you. So there's an acknowledgement of difference within that group, but also that there's some common ground around some of the things you talked about. Is that accurate according to what you were saying?
Yes, I agree, totally, with your statements. We're just in a very interesting space in our society and really the world, because the things we're talking about are not just happening in the United States of America. These challenges are worldwide.
And we have readers and people in our community who are not in the US. So it's important for us to acknowledge that as well, that there are differences in how race gets worked out, how gender gets worked out in other cultural contexts. We know the US the best, but it's happening everywhere.
Everywhere. And it really speaks to the need for Black folks, Indigenous folks, people who identify with those cultural and heritage things, to be able to be together, to breathe.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it gets hard to breathe in a majority driven environment.
Yeah.
And we too often feel smothered.
Yeah. Thank you, Joyce. And I'll just add, Joyce and I met in Dr. Amanda Kemp's Racial Justice from the Heart facilitators training. And in that program, there were options for people of color, people of the global majority, to be in an affinity group or to be in the mixed race group for processing, depending on what they preferred. And what we found is it's important for white people to have a space also, particularly around race, where we are just with white people talking about these issues. And part of that is about preventing further harm, so that it's messy and we're going to make mistakes. And so preventing further harm to people of color, part of how we do that is to do our work on our own. And so it's kind of a there's support for the process for white people, but there's a difference in the purpose of an affinity group where white people are having a conversation about race. Though we've all been harmed. So there's an aspect of healing for all of us. We've all been harmed by these systems, but the focus is a little different because we are generally breathing. We're generally getting a lot of space in the cultural context that we're in throughout our days in terms of race, in terms of our racial identity. We get a lot of space, we get a lot of breathing room. We're not having to work as hard all the time.
Right.
And so, what we need to be able to do is start facing some of these hard things that life doesn't force us to face in the same way that if you are a person in a brown or black body, you don't have a choice. It's like it is being faced all the time.
Well, it's white people have, and it's part of the privilege, have the opportunity to walk away from racial discussions at will. You can just leave, shut down, and never re-enter the space or the conversation again. I don't have that same option.
Yeah.
And so when we do have mixed groups, often, probably every session, but I don't have the data to support that. So I'll just say often in those sessions, some European American person says something that harms, triggers a person of the global majority. And if that is pointed out, typically what happens is that was not my intent, and tears and clutching of the pearls. But I think what European Americans often aren't aware of or don't remember is it's not about intention, it's about the impact, right? And the impact of what you said or what you did, the assumption you made, and to your point, we all are going to make mistakes and trip over our own feet. And when that happens, it is good to acknowledge that, apologize for that, and ask, how can I do that differently next time? And not be afraid to learn how to be different and to really do the work. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It totally makes sense. And you and I could keep talking about this for a long
Yeah.
time. And if people want to talk with us more, they should join Feel Better, Do Better Together, the
Yes.
group coaching program where you will be leading. You will be leading the BIPOC only discussions, but we also will have the our mixed race coaching sessions together. But I want to ask you a couple more quick questions, and I know we're just about out of time. So one is all this heavy stuff that we are facing that you've talked about. The title of the book is Feel Better, Do Better. Why bother focusing on feeling better? Like, does that even make any sense? Why feel better? Shouldn't we just be feeling bad?
No, I think it's important to remain hopeful. And because this work is heart-centered, that's where feelings really come from. They're manifested there. And so in order to do this work, you have to be able to feel. And if you can't feel, then you can't, you won't even begin your journey, because this work is about getting us out of our heads, because that's where ego lives. And ego is all about being defensive, and getting people into our heart center, which is where feeling happens, right? And the work is internal first. It's reflective first. And then we move out in terms of trying to share the knowledge that we've gained with others. But it must start in the heart. And of course, you have to feel. If you can't feel, then you aren't ready to even come to the starting line, to say nothing of getting to the finish. So does that answer?
Beautiful. Well, and so this is my last question, not completely disconnected from that one or from the amazing, anybody who's watching you sees the true joy in your smile in the midst of talking about all these things that are so hard, right? Like no one has been able to take that away from you. And one of my favorite quotes of all time from you is, "You're not going to take me out of my body."
Right.
So in that kind of context, could you share with listeners a couple of the self-care practices that you do that keep you in your body, able to smile, not every minute, some things are not a moment to smile, but like filled with joy, re-nourished. What are a couple of your favorite practices that you'd like to share with listeners before we close?
I love music. I love contemporary gospel music, and I love jazz, smooth jazz. And so I often have music playing in my background. I have essential oils burning. And I've learned that sometimes I just have to go to bed. I just have to shut down, and, for a day or maybe 2 days, I just have to come within, And when I do that, of course, I have my music going and my essential oils going, and I read. I read, and I read about this stuff, because I want to be able to better understand in order to have hope and to keep being able to encourage other people to begin their own journey, and not to be afraid. But, I had to learn not to be afraid. I had to learn that it's okay to have my own voice. And so my music, my reading, I do a daily meditation. And I continue to believe in people, as hard as that is sometimes. But
I hear you.
I am the eternal optimist. And I just believe everybody's at a different place. And in my meditation and my learning to rest, it's been revealed that you have to take people where they are. And sometimes where they are is just not in alignment with where I am or where I think they need to be, but I have to accept where they are because they are where they are because of their own lived experience, right? And I have to respect that and then be willing to walk with them as they explore and decide if they're ready.
Ooh, and that's a lot easier said than done when you
Oh,
are working with white folks like me and others, which is bringing us back to affinity groups, which is what your essay is on. And like, I know so much of your heart. You're out there in a red county, in a red state, standing up for racial justice, standing up for Black lives, and interacting with a lot of white folks.
mm-hmm,
And one of the things I know about you is that you really, really love to create those spaces
mm-hmm,
for Black women, especially, and more broadly for people of the global majority, where they can take a breath, where you can take a breath and
mm-hmm.
relax. And I love that you ended really with a description of how you walk your talk, that you let yourself not be the strong, amazing Black woman who can handle anything all the time.
Right.
Sometimes the strong, amazing Black woman who can handle anything chooses rest,
Mm-hmm.
and that is part of the power of the work that you do and that you offer. That that's an option. That's an option that we want Black women everywhere to have
Absolutely.
and to be able to
Because
choose.
we we carry the weight of really the world, our families, our extended families, our friends. Um, about 8 years ago now. Wow, long time. I'm convinced that women are going to save the world and that Black women are going to be a huge part of that. And that has played out in the last really 6 years. In 2016, Spirit gave that to me.
Mm.
And I have watched that happen and evolve since that was given to me. And I believe it. That's the only chance we
Hmm.
had.
Well, that feels like a really good place to end. With Black women saving the world, Black women leading the way,
Mm-hmm.
resting all along the way.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Joyce, so much. I love you so much. I'm so honored to have you in this community and as a
Thank
part of
you.
this book project. And
Thank
I look
you.
forward to more. Mwah.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.